At exactly 3:17 p.m. on a rainy Thursday, the old man walked into the downtown public library, hunched beneath a coat 2 sizes too big and soaked through at the shoulders. His silver hair stuck to his wrinkled forehead, and his shoes squished with every step. He looked lost, confused, maybe even a little scared. He stood near the front desk, clutching a leather-bound notebook to his chest like it held his last remaining memories. "Excuse me." His voice cracked like dry wood. "I'm looking for the map room, or was it the archives?" He blinked rapidly, eyes darting between unfamiliar faces. Behind the desk, 24-year-old Mallory Griffin leaned back in her swivel chair and exchanged a look with her coworker, smirking. "Archives. Map room, same difference," she muttered under her breath before rising to greet him. "Hi there, sir. You must be looking for the history section. Just past the stairs. Take a left by the biography shelves." The old man tilted his head. "But I thought it was upstairs." Mallory rolled her eyes and forced a tight smile. "Nope, definitely not. Trust me. I work here." Her tone was patronizing, the way someone speaks to a toddler insisting their imaginary friend is real. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, of course. Sorry, thank you." Mallory watched him shuffle off, dragging one foot a bit, and shook her head. "Poor guy probably doesn't even remember his own name," she whispered, snorting softly. Her coworker Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Come on now, cut the guy some slack. Oh, please. Did you see that notebook? He was holding on to it like it was some secret code book or something. I bet he's just one of those lonely old dudes who makes stuff up for attention. Wouldn't be the first." She laughed, but Ryan didn't join her. About 20 minutes later, Mallory made her rounds. When she reached the history section, she found the old man standing in front of a large map of Eastern Europe, his notebook open, lips moving silently. "Sir," she said, approaching, "did you find what you were looking for?" The old man looked up, eyes clearer now. "Yes, I was comparing border changes. Ukraine, Moldova, Transnistria. It's fascinating how lines can be redrawn without war, or sometimes because of it." Mallory folded her arms. "Uh-huh. You into that kind of stuff?" He smiled gently. "Once upon a time, I had to know these lines very well. Lives depended on it." She cocked her head. "Oh, really? What were you, some kind of history professor?" He chuckled softly. "Something like that." Mallory grinned mockingly. "Or let me guess, spy stuff, secret missions. You speak 12 languages and fought off assassins with a pencil." The man's smile didn't fade. 5 languages. "And only once with a pencil," Mallory burst out laughing. "Okay, sure. Now you're just trying too hard." But the man didn't laugh with her. Instead, he looked at her with a calm, almost sad expression. "You don't believe me. That's all right. Most don't." "Oh, come on," Mallory said, still giggling. "You can't just say stuff like that and expect people not to laugh." He looked away, staring again at the map. "I don't expect anything anymore." Something about the way he said it sobered her laughter, but she pushed the feeling down. "Well," she said, tapping her watch, "just don't stay too long. We close at 6. The next day, he was back. And the day after, always with the same notebook, always at the same map. Mallory began to ignore him until the 4th day. She was shelving books when she heard voices from around the corner. "Excuse me, young man," the old man said to another patron. Do you know if this library has copies of Russian telegrams? 1986 to 1989. The college-aged guy shook his head. "No clue. Try the internet." The old man nodded and mumbled. "Yes, but I trust paper more." Mallory chuckled to herself. The guy was a walking cliché. That day, she couldn't help herself. She followed him, trailing at a distance as he wandered toward the old microfilm room. There, she finally confronted him. "So, Mr. James Bond, what's in the notebook?" He looked up, surprised. "Would you like to see?" She blinked. "Wait, seriously." He nodded, walked to the nearest table, and slowly opened the cracked leather cover. What she saw wasn't what she expected. The pages were filled with dates, symbols, foreign words, lines of code, military references. And some were labeled in Cyrillic, some in Mandarin, some in Arabic. "What is this?" she asked. He looked at her carefully. "My work. Your what work?" "I was in signals intelligence. 40 years ago. National defense. I can't tell you everything, but I recorded what I could. Memories fade, but ink remains." Mallory scoffed. "Signals intelligence. Sure." The man raised a hand gently. "You think I'm lying? Well, yeah, kind of hard not to." He reached into the notebook, turned to a page, and pointed. "Can you read this?" She squinted at the line. It looked like gibberish. "That's Russian," it says. "The greatest weapon is silence." This one's Arabic. "Trust is earned, not given." This one is Mandarin. "Names have power." Mallory stared. "You memorized these?" "I lived them," he said simply. She was quiet. That weekend, curiosity got the better of her. She Googled signals intelligence, retired intelligence officers, Cold War code books. She even searched articles on Soviet defectors and language experts. Nothing conclusive. But now she was hooked. On Monday, she approached him with a question in French. "Vous parlez français?" "Bien, sir." "Mademoiselle," he replied smoothly, barely looking up. "Êtes-vous?" She tried a sentence. He corrected her grammar. She switched to Spanish. He answered fluidly. She tried German. He sighed and corrected her again. Her jaw dropped. "Okay, what's your name?" "Gordon. Gordon Hale." "And you were?" "CIA, NSA." He gave a soft smile. "Closer to NSA. But technically, a branch that no longer exists." She sat across from him. "Why are you here?" He looked around the library, eyes misty. "My wife passed. My daughter lives far away. This place has books, maps, silence, and it doesn't ask too much from me." Mallory didn't laugh this time. Every day that week she sat with him. She listened. He told stories and pieces of messages intercepted in Prague, of bugs hidden in hotel lamps in Istanbul, of a woman who saved his life in Beirut, and of a mission in East Berlin that never officially happened. He never bragged. He spoke with the detachment of someone who carried heavy things too long. One rainy afternoon, she asked, "Do you regret it?" He paused. "Sometimes. The lies, the paranoia. But we believed we were protecting something precious. Sometimes we were right. What about now?" "Now I just want to remember who I was. Before I forget completely." She looked down. "You're not forgetful, not really." He tapped his temple. "It's creeping in, slowly. Some names vanish, some days blur, then why come here?" He gave her a look that made her throat tighten. "Because you remembered me, even when you mocked me." She didn't know what to say. The next week, she brought her laptop and began typing as he talked. She started recording the stories, cataloging the languages, photographing the pages of his notebook. One morning, a sharply dressed man walked into the library. He had a badge. He asked for Gordon. Mallory tensed. Gordon stood slowly. The man said, "Colonel Hale, we're here to escort you to Langley. There's been a request from the director himself." Gordon blinked. "Why?" The agent smiled. "Some of your old work just resurfaced. Nobody can translate it but you." Mallory stood. "Wait, are you serious?" The agent nodded. "Colonel Hale is one of the last living code analysts from Operation Echo Wave. The file was just declassified. We need his help." Again, Gordon looked at her. "Looks like I'm useful one last time." Mallory's eyes welled up. "You never stopped being useful." As he walked away with the agent, he turned and said something in flawless Latin. She blinked. What did that mean? He smiled. "Even in silence, the truth remains." That was the last time she saw him. But his notebook remained. And a year later, she published The Pages of Silence, Memoirs of Gordon Hale. It became a bestseller. On the dedication page, she wrote, "To the old man I mocked, you remembered the world, even when the world forgot you." The book launch took place in the same library where it all began. Chairs were neatly arranged between the biography and history sections. A podium set up near the east window where the light filtered in soft and golden. The smell of old paper, floor polish, and brewed coffee lingered in the air. Mallory stood before a modest crowd, local historians, curious patrons, even a few reporters from minor outlets. Her palms were sweaty. She clutched the first printed copy of The Pages of Silence. "I didn't expect to write a book this year," she began, voice shaking slightly. "In fact, I never thought I'd meet someone who would change the way I think about history, memory, and dignity." She paused, glancing down at the well-worn leather notebook resting beside the microphone. His name was Gordon Hale. To most people, he looked like a lost, forgetful old man. I thought the same at first. I laughed at him, mocked him. I thought he was just rambling about things that never happened. But I was wrong. So wrong. She swallowed, blinking against the heat behind her eyes. He spoke 5 languages. He deciphered codes that helped prevent international disasters. He operated in the shadows for decades, and then faded into them unnoticed, uncelebrated. Mallory ran her fingers over the notebook spine. "But this book is his voice. And I hope today, at least, the world listens." When she stepped down, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was sincere. A few people shook her hand. One woman asked for a signed copy. A local news anchor recorded a short segment. Mallory smiled, nodded, thanked everyone, but her heart was elsewhere. She kept glancing at the door, hoping no, willing that he might appear in that old coat, shoes still squeaking, silver hair wet from the rain, but he never did. For months after the launch, the book quietly gained traction. It started with history professors sharing quotes on social media. Then came a podcast episode where an ex-CIA analyst wept while reading aloud from Chapter 9. By spring, it hit the national bestsellers list. Mallory began receiving messages veterans, grandchildren of Cold War operatives, even a few retired diplomats who claimed to know Gordon by another name. She responded to each one. One evening, as spring rain fell against her window, Mallory sat cross-legged on her couch, laptop open, a half-eaten burrito beside her, when an email popped up. The subject line read, "He remembers you." She froze. The message was short. "Mallory, my name is Elena Hale. I'm Gordon's daughter. He lives with me now in Vermont. His memory fades more quickly these days, but he often speaks of 8th girl at the library who listened. Thank you for giving him back his voice. Would you like to visit?" Mallory stared at the screen. Her throat clenched. She whispered, "Yes," before she even typed a reply. 2 weeks later, she stood on the front porch of a white farmhouse nestled between rolling Vermont hills, clutching a fresh copy of the book in one hand, her nerves in the other. Elena greeted her mid-40s, auburn hair pulled back, eyes so piercingly familiar. They stopped Mallory cold. "He's in the sunroom," Elena said softly. "Some days are better than others." Mallory nodded and followed. The sunroom was filled with soft afternoon light and the quiet rustle of trees outside. Gordon sat in a worn leather chair, his face thinner now, eyes distant. A blanket covered his knees. His hands, though frailer, still clutched the notebook. "Dad," Elena said gently, "you have a visitor." He looked up slowly. Mallory stepped forward. "Hi, Gordon," his brows furrowed. Then, as if a curtain pulled back in his mind, his eyes widened ever so slightly. "The map girl," her breath caught. "Yeah, that's me," he smiled. "Just a little. I wondered if you'd come." She sat beside him. "I brought something." She handed him the book. He touched the cover carefully. His fingers traced the title. Then he turned to the first page, where the dedication waited. He read it aloud in a whisper. "To the old man I mocked. You remembered the world, even when the world forgot you." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, in a voice raw with emotion, he said, "Thank you for helping me be seen." Tears slipped silently down Mallory's cheeks. "Thank you," she replied, "for showing me who you were, who you are." He chuckled faintly. "Still forget things, still get lost, but you remember the important parts." He looked at her, eyes clear for a flicker of a second. "Do you want to hear a new one? A story?" Her heart flipped. "Always." And so he began. It was a mission in 1978. He was stationed in Ankara, Turkey. A mole had slipped a message into a child's kite. The child flew the kite near a certain rooftop. That rooftop held the only man alive who could decode the final message of a Russian general defecting to the West. The code phrase was, "The kite sings before it falls." Gordon had to retrieve the kite without alerting a dozen hostile eyes watching the square. He told her how he'd distracted them with a staged lover's quarrel in German, how the child laughed when he gave the kite back wrapped around a chocolate bar, how the mole smiled one last time before vanishing into the crowd, never to be seen again. Mallory listened, transfixed. When the story ended, Gordon's head tilted back. "I think I'll rest now," he murmured. She watched him close his eyes, breathing slow and steady. Elena stood at the doorway, quiet tears glistening in her eyes. "That was the clearest he's been in weeks," Mallory whispered. "He's still in there." Elena nodded. "Thanks to you. Now so is his legacy." A year later, Gordon Hale passed away peacefully, surrounded by family. His funeral was small but powerful. A folded flag, a bugler. One gray-suited man placed a sealed envelope atop the coffin. Mallory never saw his face. She gave the eulogy. "Some people spend their whole lives being loud," she said, voice trembling. Gordon lived in silence, but his silence was powerful, purposeful, sacred. She held up the notebook. This was his story, not one of explosions or glory, but of quiet courage, brilliant minds, and the kind of honor that never asks to be thanked. She closed the notebook slowly. "And, I'm sorry it took me so long to see him. Years passed. The book became a documentary. Schools began teaching excerpts. Mallory went on to write others' biographies, oral histories, all inspired by Gordon. But she never forgot that first moment. The moment she mocked a man she didn't understand, and the moment he forgave her, without ever needing to say it. And sometimes, late at night, she'd open the old leather notebook, press her fingers to the ink, and remember the man who once said 5 simple words in Latin. Even in silence, the truth remains. It was late one night in October, nearly a year after Gordon's funeral, when Mallory found herself once again sitting on the cold tile floor of the microfilm room at the library, alone. The building dark, except for the reading lamp above her. Her fingers traced the edges of the notebook, its corners worn, the leather softened by time and use. She had read it cover to cover dozens of times, but tonight felt different. She was chasing something. A detail Gordon had once mumbled before drifting off. Lisbon, 1984. The violinist. She hadn't been able to let it go. There was no mention of Lisbon in the notebook, no violinist. And yet something about the way he'd said it, his voice, lower, more urgent, told her. This was a memory that mattered. She flipped to the final page of the notebook. There, in the bottom right corner, was a series of barely visible indentations, like writing that had once been on a page since torn out. She adjusted the lamp, held the notebook sideways, and stared. A sequence, Lis 84GH60. Her heart pounded. It was a code. 3 days later, she was in Lisbon. It was ridiculous. She told herself that 100 times as the plane descended over the Tagus River. She had no clear objective, no address, just a coded memory and the desperate conviction that Gordon's story wasn't finished yet. She had reached out to a contact she'd made during the press tour, Luis Avedo, a Portuguese historian and retired intelligence archivist who'd once sent her a message praising Gordon's code deconstructions. He met her outside the National Library, wearing a scarf, a pressed jacket, and eyes that glittered with curiosity. "So," he said, shaking her hand, "you really think the violinist is real?" I don't know," Mallory admitted, but Gordon remembered him, and he only remembered the important things. Louise nodded. "Then let's begin." Over the next week, they dug. They cross-referenced declassified dossiers, old concert programs, diplomatic guest lists. Nothing, until Louise found an envelope buried in an old intelligence memo from 1985, barely legible. Its ink fading. It read, "Subject, Violet, Asset, Lisbon. Confirmed musical identity. Cover remains intact. Primary handler, Mallory S. Breathcott. G.H. Gordon Hale." Lewis looked at her, stunned. He was the handler. And violet wasn't a color. It was a code name, a violinist, a spy. They found an old grainy photo from 1984, tucked inside a musical society archive. A young man, not mid-20s, handsome, dark hair, bow in hand. His name was listed as Leonid Ivanov, Russian by birth, though the file noted likely alias. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, it said simply, "The kite sings before it falls." Mallory's hands trembled. She had heard that phrase before. Gordon had said it to her once, casually, like recalling a childhood nursery rhyme. "Do you know what that phrase means?" she asked Louis. He leaned back. It was an old code phrase among Soviet defectors. It meant "I'm ready to disappear." Her throat tightened. Leonid disappeared. Louis nodded. Completely. 1985. No trace. After a final performance at São Carlos Theater. Mallory didn't sleep that night. She walked the cobbled streets of Lisbon until dawn, the photo clutched in her coat pocket. Back in Vermont, she visited Elena again. They sat in the same sunroom where Gordon once told stories, where the light felt softer now, more fragile. "There's something I need to ask," Mallory said gently. "Did your father ever mention Lisbon or a violinist named Leonid?" Elena frowned, thoughtful. "He used to hum a melody sometimes. Something sad, Eastern European. I asked once what it was, and he said, 'A song for someone who vanished with grace.'" She paused. "That was years ago. Why?" Mallory handed her the photo. Elena stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "He kept this in his wallet for decades." Tears filled her eyes. "Was he in love with him?" Mallory asked softly. Elena nodded slowly. "He never said it out loud, but I always knew. After my mother passed, he changed. Quiet, lonely. But when he hummed that song, I saw a part of him come alive again." Mallory didn't speak. There was nothing to say. 2 months later, she published the sequel, The Violinist Who Vanished. This time, the world noticed even faster. Major outlets picked it up. Intelligence forums lit up. Whispers emerged. Was Leonid real? Was Gordon's love for him the reason he never remarried? And Mallory, now a respected historian, gave lectures across the country, often beginning with the same words. This is not just history. It's memory. It's pain. It's love whispered in code. But there was one final chapter, and it began with a letter. It arrived on a quiet Monday morning, in a thick cream-colored envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typewritten in tight, old-fashioned print, to Miss Griffin. "You've written about me, though you never knew me. The violinist was real. I was real. You are correct. Gordon was my handler, my protection, and the one man I loved in a life built on lies. I disappeared not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to keep him safe. I read your book. I wept through every page. Thank you for giving him back to the world, for giving me back my name." L.I. Mallory stared at the letter, hands shaking. Leonid was alive, still hidden, still watching. She never told the media, never revealed the letter. Some truths were too sacred. Instead, she framed it and hung it above her desk, right next to Gordon's notebook. Every time she looked at it, she remembered that first moment, a wet coat, squishing shoes, a confused voice asking about maps. She remembered how easy it had been to mock him, and how impossible it became to forget him. Because Gordon Hale wasn't just a man, he was a library of secrets, a symphony of silence, a legend hiding in plain sight, and he had entrusted her with the last mission of his life, to be remembered. The coldest winter of Gordon Hale's life wasn't in Vermont. It was Berlin, 1962. He was 29 years old, and already operating under two aliases, one for the British, one for the Americans. No one knew his real name, except the woman he met every Thursday near the Brandenburg Gate. She was French-Algerian, fluent in German, and always wore a red beret tilted just enough to make her look careless. Her name was Salima. He hadn't spoken her name in decades. But one night, a month before his health began to decline, Mallory had asked, "Who was the first person you trusted in the field?" He had been silent for so long, she thought he hadn't heard. Then he whispered, "Salima wore red. Now, That memory echoed like a violin string vibrating through time. The flashback began in his mind with footsteps on snow. Berlin was suffocating under frost that year. His breath left thick clouds in the air as he crossed the frozen square. The wall had just gone up months before. Tensions were boiling under every manhole cover. The wrong glance could get you followed. The wrong accent could get you killed. Selima was already there. She leaned against a lamppost like she belonged to the night. "You're late," she murmured. "I'm never late," he replied. "You're just always early." She gave him a slow smile. "You have it." He handed her a tightly rolled piece of paper, no longer than a cigarette. Inside were radio frequencies, Soviet patterns. 3 were false. 1 was real. "Your handwriting," she said, squinting. "Still too clean. Looks British." "I am British," she chuckled. "No, you're not. Not really. You belong to the silence between countries." He didn't answer. She stepped closer, close enough for her breath to mist over his glasses. "You know they want me to betray you." "Right," she said. He stiffened. "French intel thinks I'm feeding you too much. CIA doesn't trust me either. The Germans hate my name. You're the only one who hasn't called me a traitor yet." He stared into her eyes. "Because you haven't betrayed me. Yet," she whispered. They stood in silence. Then she leaned in and kissed his cheek. "For now," she said, "I'm yours." Mallory documented this memory as he described it, weeks before his death. She wrote it not as a spy story, but as a story of connection, fragile, brief, burning under layers of duty. She wrote about Selima, who disappeared in 1963 during a mission in Prague. Gordon had tried to find her. He burned favors. He broke protocol. But she was never seen again. "She was my first loss," he said quietly, "but not my last." In 1967, Gordon was in Cairo. He was operating under the codename Harpsichord, embedded in a diplomatic courier team posing as a British trade envoy. His job was simple: monitor Soviet arms shipments arriving in Alexandria, intercept communications, report back. But nothing in Cairo was ever simple. One day, while retrieving a hidden recorder from the wall of a coffee shop, Gordon noticed something wrong. The T-boy, a teenager he'd passed every day for 3 months, was gone. In his place was a man pretending to be young, too tall, too stiff, eyes too alert. A trap. Gordon ducked out through the kitchen, sprinted down an alley, and was nearly hit by a donkey cart as he bolted across the street. He ran 3 blocks before ducking into a rug merchant's stall, tearing off his jacket and faking a coughing fit until the men following him passed by. He waited 4 hours in that stall. The merchant said nothing, just handed him a glass of water and muttered, "Shadows are hungry in this city." When Mallory asked if he was scared, Gordon replied, "Terrified." "Then why did you keep doing it?" she asked. He looked at her, and for once, there was a flicker of pride. "Because fear sharpens the truth. And sometimes the truth saves lives." In 1973, the betrayal happened. Buenos Aires. An informant Gordon had cultivated for 2 years, an Argentine colonel with deep connections to both the Soviets and the Americans, turned on him, sold his name, his face, his safe house location. Gordon barely escaped with his life. "They killed the man who rented me the apartment," Gordon told Mallory, voice hollow. "He had a daughter, 9 years old. She used to draw chalk flowers on the stairs. I still remember the sound of her crying when they took her away." Mallory couldn't speak. Gordon added, "That was the year I stopped believing in clean hands." She later wrote that chapter with trembling fingers. Her editor called it the quietest tragedy. It became the chapter most quoted by readers. But there were lighter memories too, like the time Gordon helped orchestrate a fake marriage between 2 agents in Helsinki just so they could secure dual Finnish citizenship. He was the best man. The couple later actually fell in love, had twins, and named one after him. Or the time he narrowly avoided arrest in Moscow by pretending to be a drunken Oxford professor and quoting Shakespeare until the KGB laughed and let him go. He had a way of surviving, of slipping through cracks. Even as he aged, that instinct remained until the cracks weren't in countries, but in his own mind. One night, late in his final year, Mallory found Gordon standing in the middle of the library's history section, confused. "Are you all right?" she asked gently. He looked at her, lost. I don't know where I am." Her heart ached. She stepped forward. "You're safe. You're with me." He blinked. "Do I know you?" She swallowed hard. "Yes. I'm the girl who mocked you, and the one who listened." Something flickered in his eyes. Then he whispered, "Mallory." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheek. "Tell me a story," he asked. "One of mine." She did. She told him about Salima, about the red beret. And he smiled. Ah, the girl in red. That was the last conversation where he remembered her fully. But she never forgot a word. By the time The Intelligence Within, The Missions of Gordon Hale, released, Mallory had cataloged over 37 operations. Gordon had been involved in some verified, others preserved only through his words. The book was nominated for several awards, translated into 14 languages, and even quoted by ambassadors in UN peace talks. But to Mallory, it was never about the fame. It was about the man who whispered in 5 languages, fought wars without weapons, and carried grief like a sacred text. It was about honoring silence and breaking it with truth, with love, with legacy. And every year, on Gordon Hale's birthday, Mallory returned to the library, placed a single red rose on the map table, and opened his notebook to the first page. She would whisper, "Tell me a story," and in her memory, he always did. Always. It was the 10th anniversary of Gordon Hale's passing when the exhibit opened. The Quiet Genius, The Life and Codes of Gordon Hale, Smithsonian Museum of American History Intelligence Wing, Special Collection Hall. B. Mallory stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by glass cases. Inside each one, pieces of his story, his cracked leather notebook, a replica of the violin Leonid once played, a red beret, delicately placed atop a marble plinth, a faded map of Berlin with small pencil notations, Salima's last known path, a framed photograph of Gordon in his later years, soft-eyed and smiling, with the caption beneath, "He remembered the world, even when the world forgot him." The room was quiet, almost reverent. People walked slowly, reading, listening to the audio recordings. Mallory had narrated his words in her voice. A group of schoolchildren paused at the quote engraved across the far wall, even in silence. "The truth remains, GH." A little boy looked up at his teacher. Was he a hero? The teacher nodded. Yes, but not the loud kind. Mallory smiled softly and stepped out into the hallway. There, in the marble corridor, an elderly man sat alone on a bench. He wore a long coat, dark sunglasses, and held a cane that didn't quite match the worn polish of his shoes. Mallory paused. Something about his presence drew her. He turned his head slightly. "You speak for him well," he said in a deep accent, Russian. Barely. She froze. His voice. She knew that voice. "Leonid," she whispered. He didn't confirm, didn't deny. He only stood, with quiet grace, and reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of music sheet paper and handed it to her. On it, written in fine, careful hand, was a short passage of melody. In the top right corner, "For Gordon, always." He looked at her one last time and said, in flawless English, "You gave him the ending I could not." Then he walked away. And though she followed him down the hallway, around the corner he was gone, as if he had never been there, as if shadows still protected him. She clutched the music to her chest, eyes full of tears. That night, she placed the sheet inside the last display case at the Smithsonian. She titled it simply, "Unfinished Symphony, Delivered." And finally, she understood some lives are never loud. Some wars are never spoken. Some loves remain hidden, but none of them are forgotten. Not anymore. Not as long as someone listens. And Mallory Griffin, once a mocking voice behind a library desk, had become the keeper of a legend's whisper. A whisper that, even now, still echoes through silence, forever.